Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see you. Good to see you. My name's Josh. I'm on the team here, and in this little week between Easter and getting back into 1 Corinthians next week, we're just pausing and dwelling a little bit on this bit of the Easter story, the end of the Easter story, really, for these disciples, and thinking about the glorious hope that we celebrate at Easter and how that flows into our lives. Fair dinkum, though, this is less of a doozy of a passage and doesn't have any stanzas in it at all. Sorry about that. I'm just making the most of Hugo being away. If you're new here, Hugo is the senior minister. He's away on holidays, and he mocks me for my apparently Australian words, which is very mean. But speaking of holidays, let me just tell you a little bit about one we tried to take last year or the year before. Okay, we had hoped it was going to be a beautiful first day of holidays, settling into a great location, relaxing start. We went to the property agent to get the key, and they said, "Oh, the place isn't quite ready for you." Oh, okay, that's all right. We'll see what it's like. So we went along. We opened the door. There was no carpet on the floor in the first part of the hallway, so we had to step across glue to get to the front door. We opened the door. We went inside, and it hadn't been cleaned, and there was a bit of there was like the filter from the air conditioner was in the bathtub for some reason. I don't know what was going on. In the car park, there was like a duffel bag that I can only assume was filled with cash or drugs. I don't know. And it was raining. I know, Australia. It was raining. So we asked for a refund, and then we took this long drive home, right? And we had hope this is going to be the first day of a great holiday. We had all these hopes for what it would be like. And yet there we were, driving back home, didn't know what the next week would bring, disappointed. Now, the first part of the passage today, if you have a look, we're going to step through this passage. Those two disciples are on kind of a return journey a little bit like that. They'd gone to Jerusalem with such high hopes, and now they're on their way home, probably, to this place called Emmaus. And, well, they're talking about what's happened, and they're caught up by this stranger who comes up kind of behind them and asks what they're talking about. Now, we're told at this point in the passage that that's Jesus, right? It says it there, verse 15. We know it's Jesus, but they don't know at this point. They're kept from recognizing him. That's in verse 16. This is amazing how Jesus does this. Post-resurrection Jesus, he is a crazy guy. He can do some wild stuff. It's like a Jedi mind trick. This is not the Messiah you're looking for. I don't know how he does it, but they don't realize who it is. And so then he kind of innocently asks them what they're discussing. And when he does, they stop, they stand dead still. It says their faces are downcast. It's almost too depressing to kind of talk about this with a stranger. Well, what's got them? Their hope is in the past tense, right? They say, "We had hoped." That's what they say in verse 21. I don't know when you've used that phrase before, if you've had a holiday experience like me, but maybe for things a bit more serious than that. Maybe, we had hoped that all that was going on in the Middle East would be sort of sorted out by now. I had hoped that I wouldn't get as angry as that ever again. We had hoped that the sickness wouldn't have been so bad. I had hoped that people would be more friendly to me this year. We had hoped to see him one last time. I had hoped that our relationship could go back to like it was before. I had hoped just that life would turn out a little bit differently. We have lots of hopes, don't we? Lots of hopes about life, and often we have disappointed hopes. Here are some other hopes that we might have, but might actually seem so unrealistic that we wouldn't even say them or maybe even think them. Right? We had hoped that we would see that person who's died again. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? We had hoped that those who've committed atrocities in our world would actually be brought to justice. Sounds unlikely. We had hoped actually that sickness wouldn't exist at all anymore. That'd be pretty good. I had hoped that actually my body wouldn't decay with age. I had hoped that I would stop hurting other people forever. I had hoped that I'd be satisfied. Some pretty big hopes, aren't they? Now, these two friends, these two disciples who are going back to Emmaus, I think what they were hoping for was more like that second list. Well, they say, we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And that means, if you've read the backstory, that is a huge hope. Right? That is a hope that God is going to fix the whole world. He would do it by redeeming his people. That is, he would pay himself to free them from their own enslavement to sin. Right? This human problem of turning in on ourselves, away from other people and away from God. And it would mean not just that, it would mean forgiveness, but it would also mean war, a thing of the past, sickness, gone, relationships healed, every injustice set right, God coming to town, God setting things right for death, not to snatch away the best of our lives and the best people in life. It would mean once again knowing personally and deeply the God of the universe. What an amazing hope. That's a hope that connects with all of our hopes, isn't it? That's the hope we need. These two disciples, they'd seen signs that they thought this might be starting with Jesus. And you see in verse 19, they start to describe to the stranger, he was a prophet, powerful in word and deed. It looked like it was maybe happening, except then he's been crucified and killed. They had hoped that he was the one. This is the thing though, real hope it's hard to recognize. If you're a Pathfinder following along on the sheets, I will mark them. No, actually I won't mark them. But we're up to our second point if you're following along. Real hope's hard to recognize. These disciples, they talk of hope in the past tense because, think of what it would be like for them. It makes sense, right? Jesus has been crucified, right? They think, well, perhaps he wasn't who we thought he was. Perhaps God isn't going to redeem Israel after all, or not now. I think that's how we're inclined to think about the world a little bit too. Maybe God isn't going to do it. Maybe Jesus, sometimes we think, oh, maybe he isn't who he said when we look around our world. But this stranger on the road with the disciples, he challenges that way of looking at the world. He says, actually, maybe there's another way of looking at what's happened. Perhaps those things that have gone horribly wrong were actually part of the plan. Have a look what he says to them in verse 26. He says, did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? I reckon here are the two kind of reasons that it's hard for them to recognize him. Two reasons that still make it hard for us to actually believe in the hope of the Easter story, to recognize hope in all its fullness as we live our lives. Right? There's those two parts. There's the suffering part, right? Is what happened seems almost too bad to be true. And then there's the glory part, right? The results seem almost too good to be true. I think maybe that can't be real. And so let's have a look at those. It feels like it's sort of what's happened is too bad to be true. Why did the Messiah have to suffer? And the stranger on the road, he explains to these disciples that these things, the suffering, the crucifixion, and the death of the Messiah, the very thing that looks like failure, we're used to it, right? We've heard this story lots of times, but the very thing that looks like failure, it's actually part of the plan. That's crazy, isn't it? He uses the scriptures that they had, what we call the Old Testament part of the Bible, to show how you can see it in the story that's gone before. I'll just give you one little example. This is an example from Isaiah 53. Maybe this is something he kind of referred to in this conversation. So this is written sort of 700 years before. And here's something from Isaiah 53 verse 9. It says, he was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Now, that's talking about the Messiah. But suffering was the plan, right? That was sort of foretold. I think if we recoil at this idea of this kind of horrible death for the one who's supposed to be king, then we recoil even more when we think about the Bible, kind of what the Bible says about why that suffering came about. Well, Jesus suffered and died though he had done no violence or deceit. He suffered because of the violence and deceit of others, right? What the Bible calls sin, right? Jesus suffered because of our sin. It doesn't really, we don't like thinking about that, admitting that, I don't think. He suffered to redeem people like us. So if you're someone here today who doesn't follow Jesus yet, it's great to have you, and good that you're here on the day that 321 is starting as well. But if you're here and you're thinking about Jesus, it's probably very easy to stumble over this part of the story, Jesus' suffering, his humility, his seeming weakness, and think, oh, that must be some kind of mistake. It's very easy not to want to confront the fact that all of that actually points to a problem within us. See, in our world, the people who we think of as successful and popular, they're people who have lots of stuff, people who are in charge, people who are physically fit and healthy, people who are winners, people who are triumphing over those who oppose them, not the other way around. Or if you're a person who is following Jesus here today, I think it's very easy for us to forget or perhaps just downplay the fact that Jesus suffered as part of this plan because of us. And to forget that actually suffering is what he calls his followers to as well. And that's not a mistake. That when we experience suffering and difficulties, that could be part of the plan too. So it seems sort of too bad to be true on the one hand, but then the result seems too good to be true. Right? The stranger on the road, he says, the Messiah had to then enter his glory. Right? Enter his glory. He had to rise from the dead, never to die again, and live on forever. Still, Jesus is living today in heaven, and he's one day going to appear back again as the undisputed king of the cosmos. But that's hard to believe because it's just so good, isn't it? Death isn't the end. We get told it is all the time in our world, but death isn't the end. That one man has already come through death. And of course, if that's true, then think about what that means. Right? That all those we had hoped, they change to we have hope. Right? We have solid hope. We have hope that we will see those who have died in Christ again. Right? We have hope that every war criminal will actually be brought to justice. We have hope that sickness won't exist anymore. I have hope for a new body like Jesus' body that won't decay. I have hope that I will stop hurting people, that I'll no longer be turned inwards on myself, but I'll be renewed. I have hope that I'll be satisfied fully and completely when I see the God of the universe face to face. It's easy to forget how amazing this hope is, how wonderful it is. One man rose from the dead. He went through death. We don't have to do anything to have life, but trust him. It's almost too good to be true. You think, what's the catch here? And yet this too is clear in the Old Testament. I'll give you another example from that same chapter in Isaiah, chapter 53, verse 11. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. I think it's a struggle to recognize this hope because it seems both too bad in some ways, but also too good. And it's so unexpected, it's difficult to embrace it. But it's about to hit these disciples. They do end up recognizing who Jesus is, that this hope is real. They ask the stranger to stay with them, and as they have dinner, suddenly they realize, How do they recognize him? Why do they recognize him right at that moment? I think this is vital if we want to, recognize hope and keep living in hope in our lives. There seem to be two moments that help them as we read the story. Have a look at these moments. Moment one, what was actually before dinner. Have a look down in verse 32 as they're kind of reflecting back. They realize that as he was talking through the Old Testament scriptures, their hearts were burning within them, they say. So they realized, well, actually, as he was talking, I started to realize that the Old Testament stuff that he was describing matches really well with what had happened with Jesus, that there's somehow a big overarching plan that's happening here. And they get this sense that could it be? I think maybe it's true, but they've still not recognized him at that point. Right? They need something more. So with this Old Testament fulfillment, they need something more. The second moment is as he breaks the bread and hands it to them. He's there in front of them doing this really earthly, kind of familiar action. They've probably seen him do this lots of times before. He shows them that he's really alive. Now, we don't have Jesus right in front of us, breaking bread in front of us. We have something else, though, that they didn't have. We've got all the evidence of him being alive found in the New Testament, right? In all the books of the New Testament and the letters there, like this very account that we're reading today, written by Luke. Even him right in front of them was not enough for them to actually recognize who Jesus was. The trigger to them actually recognizing him, to actually realizing that hope is real. Well, what was it? It was Jesus making himself known to them. Have a look, their eyes were opened in verse 31. And then he disappears from sight. Another strange Jedi trick. I don't know, how did he do that? That's amazing. Disappears from sight. See, you look back and you think, it's clear that Jesus has been in control of this whole day. Right, he's the one who comes up to them on the road. They were kept from recognizing him. He asks them questions to draw out what's happened. He's drip feeding them information so they can slowly understand. He kindly stays with them to give them more time to recognize him. He might say how foolish you are, which they are, but he wants them to understand. And he chooses this moment to make himself known. He wants them to know him. He wants you to know him. So how do we recognize that hope is real? How do we recognize it more and more? What are kind of our equivalents to these moments I was talking about? I think the first one is very similar. We read the Old Testament scriptures. We see how he fits perfectly into the story of our world. And the second one was, we look at the New Testament witness, the accounts of Jesus being risen from the dead that convince us that that was really true. And we ask him to make himself known to us. This is what we need for real hope. Don't we? We need to know Jesus. I think what a moment that would have been. Imagine that when they just realized for a second, it's him. Imagine the kind of the heart-stopping joy that would have been in them as they just realized what that means. You see in verses 33 to 35, they're sort of settling in for the night. They've decided it's too far to go any further, but they immediately get up. They race back to Jerusalem. They throw kind of caution to the wind, and this hope they've realized is real. It may not have all finally happened yet. The full redemption is still coming, but this is the moment that goes from we had hoped to we have hope. I think this is a great story, and I love reading it because you get to look in on these two disciples. And we've known the whole time through this story that the stranger is Jesus. We've been able to look at them as they've grappled with this kind of impossibility of him being raised from the dead. while he's standing right beside them. It's comical, isn't it? The fact that he's right there. So there's slowness to realize. As I'm reading, it's almost frustrating. It's almost like you want to kind of shake them and go, come on, he's behind you. Now they do that in the pantomime. It's a bit like that. We've been able to look in from the outside. Now, I wonder what someone looking in from the outside might observe today, here. I wonder what they'd think of our response right now. Right? Jesus is still alive. He's alive right now. Right? He is in heaven at this moment. He is longing for us to trust him and to trust him more and more. Imagine someone who's somehow outside of all of this, looking in on the situation. They see Jesus in heaven, right, praying for us, longing for us to trust him. They see us here in this room, reading, thinking about these matters of life and death and thinking, well, how are we going to respond? I wonder what that person would see. Perhaps they'd see us sort of being distracted a little bit. Our mind's kind of wandering on to lunch or whatever else, or some issue we're trying to work out in our lives. Perhaps they would see us hesitating a little bit, doubting whether it's true, or perhaps if we've been a Christian for a while, we might just look at it with a bit of a shrug of the shoulders. We've heard this story so many times before. Perhaps they'd see us grappling with that. Is this too good to be true? Is it too bad to be true? What if someone was looking in on us today? Would they want to give us? Would they want to give you a good shake? And just say, come on, how slow are you to believe? He's alive. Because he is. Jesus is alive. That's the truth. For some here today who've not trusted Jesus before, I invite you just to recognize that hope this morning. Trust him. Turn I had hoped into I have hope. For some who are here who might not be sure exactly where you're at, I think the challenge is to be like those disciples before they fully recognized Jesus. Right? They were interested enough that they invited him in. They wanted him to stay. They wanted to hear more. And Jesus wanted to be recognized. Right? He's kind. So keep looking, keep investigating. Maybe your heart has started to burn within you. And perhaps you want to come along to that 3-2-1 course that's starting this afternoon. And for those of us who've trusted Jesus, I think this is an encouragement to be like these disciples after they recognize Jesus, right? To embrace this hope as it really is more and more. Right? When suffering comes in life and things seem too bad, we look to him and we keep hoping. When we perhaps think about things being set right and us being set right, when we dare to dream of that reality that is promised, then we can look to him and we can keep hoping. We hold on to hope in all its extremes of suffering and glory. The challenge is to be full of that joy and excitement as we think of it like those disciples did. At Easter, Jesus changes we had hoped into we have hope, solid hope. Now let's pray. Father, thank you so much that Jesus is alive right now. Thank you so much that he is kind and wants us to trust him, and has promised that he will redeem his people and this world will be set right. We ask, Lord, that like you revealed yourself to those disciples, you'd reveal yourself to us this morning. Show us so clearly how you are the suffering yet glorified King. Help us to trust you. Help us to trust the hope that you bring. Amen.